Hello, my lovey. Welcome to Joy du Jour. I am joined today by my sibling entrepreneur, Meg Joyce, all things brand design and alignment. And I, of course, am Melissa Trumble, your Joy visionary. And let's talk today about change. We are hardwired against it because in days of yore, when our lizard brains were developing and evolving, any change was probably going to result in our death. So the people who like had a static situation and just stayed status quo, they lived to have more children. And thus here we are. And yet when something changes, like you get a different car or I don't know, the time of something changes, we can have a reaction that is extremely panicked. And you can call it negative first reaction. There's a lot of different psychological terms for it. But basically, we are not wired to embrace change. And so if you can get into the habit of taking a pause before you respond to whatever the situation is, like, of course I can't change that. Don't be ridiculous. Like, well, hang on. Tell me more about that is my go-to. What about you, Meg? When you have somebody like trying to change something up or an event, something else happens, it's not of your volition. How do you give yourself a little break tap?
Yeah, so the initial response consistently is fear, terrified, just pure fear. And I typically will want to just cut and run
Right.
because I'm not prepared for this. I'm not
Okay.
prepared for something
And
new,
that's
something different, crazy anxiety.
yeah, that's
And
classic
then
fight, flight,
yes,
freeze, fawn.
exactly. So then I take a pause and I try to think to myself, okay, where am I feeling this? Is this feeling like it's founded in reality? Or am I having an emotional reaction that is informing or potentially going to inform something that's going to move me away from something that could actually be good? Like what is rational here and what is irrational here, and how
Yeah.
can I figure out what's really going
I love that. That's very stoic, by the way. Rock and roll, Epictetus.
on?
And I would like to add to that that when we give ourselves permission to ask ourselves, what story are we telling ourselves about whatever this, difference in action is going to be or event or whatever it is that's changing, whether you're moving, maybe, you might have to relocate and that's terrifying. And oh my gosh, why would I want to do that? Well, that's a great question. Why would you want to do that?
Mhm.
Huh? Is it going to be better money? Is it going to be a better location, maybe a less expensive location or a more culturally vibrant location? Like, what are the truths in this event? Because no event has a value on it. We put that on with how we filter it through our thoughts and feelings, our emotions. And our emotions are not rational. Sometimes they do jive. If someone dear to you passes away, you will be very sad. Or you might be relieved that they're not suffering and that you're not having to care for them. Like the emotions happen and they're all fine. We just, things do happen and we get to ask ourselves, I'm feeling this way. Interesting. Why? I miss them, or I'm so pleased that, it must be such a relief. I'm relieved because I started mourning them as soon as they got their prognosis, or, like there's a lot of complicated nuances, especially with grief. But this could be for, I mentioned relocating as well. I mean, I've got all the options in the world. I'm very, very lucky being an American and, having had a certain career and my partner has a certain career. And so we get to choose where we want to retire. And so
Yeah,
then
I think so. Sorry, go ahead.
And so then I'm like, well, where do I want to retire? We have the whole world. Oh, you know?
Yeah. I think it's so funny. My husband is Irish and he grew up on a tiny little island. And so when he moved to America, he would almost have panic attacks when we would go out to eat because all of a sudden there's a bazillion choices on the menu. Whereas
Yes.
before it was meat, potatoes, meat, potatoes, meat, potatoes, maybe a vegetable.
With or without gravy.
Um, yeah, exactly. So it was so funny to watch him transition into that. Something else I wanted to mention is it's important for us to recognize that there is value in holding on to things and there's value in letting go of things and trying to figure out if it's the fear of change for a move. We're using the metaphor of
Yeah.
moving somewhere new. um there's value in wanting to stay put. but you have to try and figure out where is the greater value and where is the greater risk. Like,
Mhm.
am I losing more by staying stuck?
Right.
Or am I going to lose more by moving? And then the fear and the sadness may be justified. Maybe it's not a choice you're making, and those feelings
Yeah.
are justified.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I tend to feel like the advantage of change typically outweighs the fear and the risk involved in staying stuck.
I would argue that always an advantage of change is that it will promote neuroplasticity in your brain, whether you want
That's
it or
fair.
not. That this is why I stand on one foot when I brush my teeth. This is why I move my mouse to my non-dominant hand. Like I'm always trying to promote that elasticity because I want to have a well brain as long as my body is well. So even when it is something that you don't want, maybe your kid has to repeat a grade, or I mean, hello, the pandemic. None of us wanted that,
Yeah.
but we had to figure out a way to deal with it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and once the pandemic ends, we get to determine, well, is it then going to be wine o'clock every night again, or are we going to like get back into like normal living? Because I know for myself, I don't leave the house as much as I used to.
Yeah.
It's just like maybe go to the
Yeah.
store once a week sometimes, like, and I volunteer teaching, but you, you know, I'm just not as active outside the home as I used to be, and so I get to recognize that right here, right now, and say, yeah, lady, you need to
Yeah.
get yourself out.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you mentioned the pandemic because I feel like, my focus is primarily around business owners.
Mhm.
And that's my community. And I feel like we all are walking around in this collective disillusionment, like the pandemic either didn't happen or that things have just snapped back to the way they used to be. And we are all collectively agreeing to not talk about it. And
Oh,
that's
interesting.
nuts. That is nutty. And I don't understand it because it was traumatizing and we need to talk about it and we need to recognize that it happened. Um, but it's been interesting to see how business owners have adapted to this post-pandemic world.
Hmm.
Um, because I so part of the us pretending that everything's okay and things haven't changed, we all changed our businesses.
Yeah.
We all significantly changed how our businesses operate and how our brands exist in the world. And then I had a client of mine liken it to trying to fit her business and herself and her brand into who she was pre-pandemic. Felt like trying to put on a pair of jeans that she hadn't tried on since before the pandemic. It's not a nice feeling.
Right.
It's
When
we have
it's
grown, we have changed.
yes. And that speaks to the you cannot go back home again.
Right.
People talk about you're homesick for where you grew up. Well, if you go back there, it's not the same place where you grew up. It's been so many years. There have been buildings and, other things are moving on and different kinds of people are there. And, like some aspects of it. I mean, I'm from New Orleans. It's a pretty iconic city. And so the spirit of that is still there, but it's vastly different from before Hurricane Katrina, from last year. It's just growing and changing. And so we notice those changes more with some distance, and it's the same thing with ourselves. I am
Yeah.
absolutely not the same person that I was before the pandemic. I'm not the same person I was 1 year ago. You could really, I mean, yesterday, yeah, I'm pretty similar, but you know what I'm saying? Like we do change
Yeah.
every day. And the idea that we can be eternal students, constantly feeding ourselves new information and being curious and getting into the world and like, well, how does that work? Well, what does this mean? I don't understand. Like electricity works because I turn on a switch. Well, you can go look it up. Like, how do you get hydroelectrics? How do like, what are the different ways we get electricity? It's pretty cool, actually. But I'm a big old nerd and I will fully own that.
I love it.
So
I love it.
when you're dealing specifically with change in your business,
Mhm.
how is that different, or does that differ from how you handle change in your personal life?
Yes. Yes, it's very different because it feels like there are a separate set of experiences that live inside of me. There's the experiences that are my life experiences. And I am a huge proponent of your brand and your life are not that disparate.
Right.
You are at the center of your business. You are at the center of your life. It all stems around you. But I will say that as far as my business is concerned and my life is concerned, I can recognize in the moment when business change is happening, I'm not as affected by, say, childhood trauma and things that happened to me in school and things like that, because that does feel compartmentalized. But I am affected by traumatic things that happened to me in business. And it's like a separate set of historical events in my
Mhm.
own life. What is the same is my reaction. So I'm triggered by different things because
Mhm.
business trauma is a thing and life trauma is a thing, and they do cross over. But my reaction, that initial, for me, it's initial defensiveness,
Mhm.
like how dare they? And then after that, it's the oh my God, what? Like I am not worth any of the good things that I have built for myself.
Ooh, yes. Whenever you
Mhm,
have that sort of system imbalance or shift,
mhm.
like the energy just gets a little wobbly or it really does mess with the foundation that you've built for yourself. And underneath that foundation is all of the subconscious stuff that we put together when we were kids. And that is just inherently illogical because we were little kids. So, and especially if you get into the I'm not worthy or I should be afraid or the world is a scary place, it's not safe. Well, we don't operate well from a place of danger or violence or not safety. So when that does happen, when a change does happen, whether it's in at work or in your personal life, it's jarring. And
Yeah.
again, that's another invitation, I would say, to take a step, take a breath, telescope out, think about the universe, the stars, the whole intergalactic system, telescope in, think about grains of sand, salt in the ocean, the water cycle, what's happening in your veins and in your body, and get a little perspective. And then that's where the curiosity. All right, well, what am I telling myself? Okay, is that true? Well, I don't see the future. I don't know what's going to happen. So I can make up whatever scenario in my mind that's going to be catastrophic, but I don't actually know what is going to happen.
Yeah. I love challenging the worst case scenario because I had a coach at one point who I was so afraid. I was early enough in my business and I was young and I was so insecure. And she asked me, "What is your biggest fear?" And I said, "Fear of failure. Like I am constantly terrified that I am failing." And she said, "Okay, so what does failure look like?" Oh, okay. Well, losing the house and having to move back in with my parents and having to go get a job and blah, 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 blah. And she said, "Okay, so how close are you to that?" Oh, not, not close, not close at all. Then you're not failing. Oh, like having the reality check, it's so helpful. I tell
Yes.
people, take whatever it is that is in your brain that is making you nuts and terrified and write it down.
Yes.
Because if you write it down, then it becomes then reality will challenge it. It's gonna make you laugh, maybe. It's gonna feel silly and trivial, or maybe it is real. Maybe it is real, but looking at it and physically writing it out, not on a computer, physically writing it out is gonna give your brain a a little tick to help move the cogs along to work through the problem.
Right.
Whatever it is, it's bigger in your head than it is on a piece of paper.
And this also, that's a good start to the exercise to avoid toxic positivity is that you do, okay, what is the worst case scenario? Oh, wow, that would feel really, really terrible. Okay, well, let me think about how I would respond to that for the X amount of minutes, whatever time you give it. And then, all right, well, I'm going to leave that there because it hasn't happened yet. But now I
Right.
know that I have that option to respond to
Yeah.
it if it does escalate to that point.
Yeah.
And then you leave that worry and you leave that all of the upset, the rumination, and it's not part of you. It
Yeah.
absolutely is not part of you.
Yeah. And recognizing that there's so much fear tied up in change, but that change is inevitable. We can be scared of it, but it's going to happen anyway.
It's value neutral.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Exactly. I love there's a quote that I've seen floating around the internet a number of times, and it's something along the lines of um there's different versions of it. My favorite is you can choose to like the snow or not like the snow, but there will be the same amount of snow either way. You will
mhm,
just enjoy it or not. You
yep,
can choose to embrace change and to see it as an opportunity, or you can worry about it and struggle against it, and it's going to happen anyway. And the only
yes.
thing that's different is your experience of it.
And I would argue that your stressful energy being added to the mix is only going to increase the amounts of chaos that occur due to whatever change, because you're not going to be in a receptive, logical, competent place to deal with it because you're going to be upset.
Yeah, the best things in my life have all happened when I was not in control of them, and the worst things in my life have happened when I have tried to control things that I was not supposed to be controlling.
And honestly, the only thing we can control is right in here.
Mhm.
We control what we do, we control how we respond, and we control what we believe is true. And
Yeah.
so that is a great note to end this little chat on. So,
Just
Ma
a light
love
chit chat.
remember that. Acknowledge it, be curious, find out if what you're responding to or reacting to is actually legit, because you don't know what other people have going on in their mind. And typically, their thoughts are 90% consumed with what they have got to get done. So,
Yes. Yeah, people are self-centered. We don't realize we think that everybody else is as focused on us as we are, and
yeah,
they're not. They're not.
not at all.
They're just not.
And just remember, laugh, babies. That's it for us. Have a good one. Hugs.